All right, everyone, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive, and today we're tackling a topic that's a bit of a heavyweight in the UPSC world.
Oh, absolutely. This one's practically guaranteed to show up on your exams.
That's right. We're talking about climate change in India. And to guide us through this complex landscape, we're turning to a recent article in the Indian Express.
Yeah,
So you know we're bringing you the best.
always a reliable source, especially for UPSC prep.
Now, this deep dive is going to be pure gold for both mains and prelims prep. So buckle up and get those notepads ready. Let's start with the big news. The World Meteorological Organization just dropped a bombshell,
They did. It's official 2024 is the hottest year on record globally.
and we're talking a significant jump.
A whopping 1.55 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. It's a number that should make any UPSC aspirant pay attention.
No kidding, it's pretty alarming. But here's where things get really interesting for us here in India. The article highlights something that seems a bit counterintuitive.
You mean how India is actually warming slower than the global average?
Exactly. The IMD, our meteorological department, recorded an increase of only 0.65 degrees Celsius above normal for 2024. So why is India bucking the trend?
Well, it's not as simple as saying we've got some secret weapon against climate change. There are a few factors at play here, and understanding them is key for tackling those tricky UPSC questions.
Okay, so let's break it down. What's the first piece of the puzzle?
Our geographical location. That plays a significant role.
Okay, so how does where we are on the map affect our warming trend?
Well, think about it. The poles are warming much faster than the tropics, and that's because of how heat is transferred globally. And there's something called the albedo effect, which comes into play too.
Okay, hold on a second. And I know our listeners are out there prepping for the UPSC, so let's make sure everyone's on the same page. Could you give us a UPSC-friendly explanation of this albedo effect?
Absolutely. Imagine a UPSC question asking you to compare the albedo effect in the Himalayas versus the Arctic. It all comes down to how surfaces reflect sunlight. The Arctic, with its massive ice sheets, has a high albedo, meaning it reflects a lot of sunlight back into space.
So like a giant mirror reflecting the sun's energy away from the Earth.
Exactly. But here's the catch. As that ice melts, it exposes darker land and water, which absorb more heat, and that leads to faster warming. Now compare that to the Himalayas. We do have snow cover, but it's limited compared to the Arctic.
So our albedo effect isn't as strong a factor in India's overall warming.
Precisely.
So our location and limited snow cover give us a bit of a buffer, at least when it comes to the albedo effect.
Mm-hmm.
What else is contributing to this slower warming scenario in India?
Well, here's something that might surprise you. India's pollution actually has a cooling effect.
Wait, what? You mean all that smog and air pollution we hear about?
The very same. That particulate matter and aerosol pollution actually scatter sunlight back into space, partially counteracting the warming effect.
So our pollution woes, in a strange twist, are acting as a shield against some of the heat. That's a real double-edged sword, though, right? I can already imagine a UPSC examiner crafting a question around that dilemma.
You're catching on quickly. It's a classic example of a complex issue with no easy answers. And let's be crystal clear, this is not an endorsement of pollution. The health and environmental consequences are still extremely serious.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about understanding the intricate links between seemingly separate issues, which is a skill that's essential for acing those UPSC exams. But even with this slower warming, the impacts of climate change are already being felt in India. What are some of the key consequences we need to be aware of, especially from the UPSC perspective?
Well, sea level rise is a major concern globally, and projections show it could rise by at least another foot by 2100.
A foot of sea level rise, that's a lot. What does that mean for India?
Now imagine you're facing a UPSC question about the impact of sea level rise on India. We have a vast coastline, bustling coastal cities, and incredibly vulnerable ecosystems. Think about the implications for coastal communities, displacement, disaster management. It's all interconnected.
It's a perfect illustration of how seemingly global issues have very real and localized impacts, something the UPSC loves to test. What other climate change impacts should be on the radar for UPSC aspirants?
Well, droughts and heat waves are projected to become more frequent and intense, putting immense pressure on our agriculture, water resources, and public health. This ties directly into UPSC syllabus topics like food security, sustainable development, even social justice.
It's like this domino effect with climate change impacting every aspect of our society and economy. And let's not forget about the potential impact on India's biodiversity. That has to be a concern for the UPSC as well.
Absolutely. Climate change poses a significant threat to India's rich biodiversity, particularly vulnerable ecosystems like the Himalayas and the Western Ghats. This connects to conservation efforts, environmental policies, and international agreements, all critical areas for the UPSC exam.
And speaking of policies, the Indian Express article really emphasizes the need for India to boost its climate observation and impact assessment capabilities. Why is this such a big deal, particularly for someone gearing up for the UPSC?
Well, let's put on our policymaker hats for a moment. Imagine you're tasked with developing India's climate action plan. You need reliable, localized data to make informed decisions. If we're in the dark about how climate change is impacting different regions, our policies could be ineffective or even backfire.
So it's not just about understanding the problem in a general sense. It's about having detailed data to craft targeted solutions. What are some of the concrete steps the article recommends? This is where things get really practical for a UPSC aspirant.
Well, the article lays out a pretty clear roadmap. First, we need to significantly expand our network of weather stations, particularly in rural areas. We need a more comprehensive picture of climate trends across the country.
Now that sounds like it could be a direct link to the Viksit Bharat vision for 2047. Can already picture a UPSC question asking how improved weather monitoring aligns with this vision of a technologically advanced India.
You're right on the mark. That vision emphasizes technological advancement, and a robust nationwide network of weather stations is a key part of that.
So expanding weather stations, check. What else is on the list?
Next up, computing power. We need a serious upgrade in our ability to process all that climate data. This is where high-performance computing comes in. And it's not just about crunching numbers. It's about developing complex models that can predict future scenarios and guide our planning.
That makes sense. More data, more processing power, sharper insights,
Yeah.
more effective policies. What's next?
The article is a big advocate for regular India-specific climate change impact assessments. We need a constant pulse on how climate change is affecting our sea levels, ecosystems, vulnerable communities. This data is the foundation for good policymaking, and the UPSC might just ask you why.
So we're talking about data collection and data processing, and then using that data to inform policy decisions. That's a clear roadmap. And I'm betting the UPSC will want you to know the ins and outs of each stage.
Yeah.
What else is on the agenda?
Well, the article highlights the importance of strengthening Mission Masam.
Mission Mausam. Now, that might not be on everyone's radar. Could you give us a quick breakdown of what it is and why it matters for the UPSC?
Think of Mission Masam as India's initiative to improve weather prediction and build climate resilience, especially in vulnerable coastal and mountainous regions. It's all about being prepared and proactive.
Okay, so preparedness, resilience, a proactive approach to climate change. It's all aligning perfectly with the UPSC's focus on governance and policy. What's the last piece of the puzzle?
Localized impact studies. Remember, India is a vast and diverse country. Climate change won't affect every region in the same way.
Ah, yes, the classic UPSC trap, assuming a uniform impact across a diverse country. So how do these localized impact studies fit into the big picture? Why should a UPSC aspirant care?
Well, think about it this way. The UPSC could ask you to analyze the specific challenges a particular region of India faces in the context of climate change. These localized impact studies provide the data and insights you need to answer that question effectively. They help us tailor solutions to specific contexts.
So it's about moving beyond a one-size-fits-all approach and recognizing the unique challenges and opportunities in different parts of India. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've gone from the global context of climate change to India's unique situation, the specific impacts we're facing, and now the strategies being implemented to gather data, strengthen predictions, and build resilience.
We've laid a solid foundation, but there's so much more to explore. In Part 2, we'll delve even deeper into India's climate action plan, the challenges, the opportunities, and what it all means for you as you gear up for those UPSC exams.
We're just getting started, so grab your notes, stay hydrated, and get ready for Part 2 of our climate change deep dive coming up next.
Welcome back to our climate change deep dive. We're picking up right where we left off. This topic isn't just about the science, though. It's about policies, impacts, finding solutions. All crucial skills for the UPSC.
Couldn't agree more. We talk about how India's warming trend is different, what
Yep.
that means for us. But now let's put on our policymaker hats. How is India tackling this massive challenge?
That's the million-dollar question. And the UPSC wants to see that you can analyze the solutions, not just understand the problems. So let's talk about India's ambitious goal of net zero emissions by 2070.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. And understanding how we plan to get there is crucial for the UPSC. It's not just science. It's economics, social, political, everything.
Exactly. It's a complex puzzle with pieces spanning across all sectors of the Indian economy. But luckily, there's a framework that can help us break it down. The United Nations Environment Program, or UNEP, has outlined a six-sector strategy, and knowing this could give you an edge in the UPSC.
Okay, 6 sectors to tackle climate change. Sounds comprehensive, but also a bit overwhelming. What are they?
They focus on reducing emissions from energy industry, agriculture, forests, transport, and buildings. Pretty much covers everything, right?
Sounds like it. Let's dive into these sectors one by one, starting with energy. That's obviously a huge piece of the puzzle. What are some of the key strategies India is using, and how might they be framed in a UPSC question?
Well, think about it this way. The UPSC could ask you to analyze the feasibility of India achieving its renewable energy targets while ensuring we have enough energy for a growing population. It's a balancing act.
Right, because we need to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, but also keep the lights on.
Exactly. India is making progress in renewable energy, especially with solar and wind power. But it's not without its challenges.
I've heard about some impressive solar projects in India. Are those the kind of things UPSC examiners might ask about?
Absolutely. The UPSC loves current affairs and government policies. Knowing about major initiatives like the Solar Parks program or the National Wind Solar Hybrid Policy is definitely a good thing.
So it's not just about knowing they exist, but understanding how they work and what their impact is.
You got it. The UPSC could ask you to analyze their effectiveness, their impact on different groups, or even compare them to similar initiatives in other countries. It's about showing that you really understand the nuances.
Got it. So renewable energy is a big focus, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. What about industry? India is industrializing rapidly. How do we balance economic growth with protecting the environment? Sounds like an essay question waiting to happen.
You're reading my mind. The UPSC might very well ask you to analyze this dilemma. Balancing development with sustainability in the industrial sector is a major challenge. One key strategy is promoting energy efficiency within industries.
So things like upgrading to better technology and using cleaner processes.
Exactly. And there's also the idea of shifting towards a circular economy model.
Ah, yes, the circular economy. That's all about reducing waste and reusing resources. How does that apply to India's climate action plan, and how could the UPSC ask about it?
The UPSC could ask you to evaluate the role of the circular economy in achieving India's net zero emissions target. They might even ask you to compare it with traditional linear economic models.
So it's about moving away from that take, make, dispose mentality and finding ways to keep resources in use for longer.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which reduces emissions from pretty much every stage in the process. Okay, we've covered energy and industry. Let's move on to agriculture. India's got a lot of mouths to feed, but agriculture also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. How do we tackle that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. How can we ensure food security while also addressing climate change?
Picture this. The UPSC asks you to evaluate the role of sustainable agriculture in achieving both food security and climate change mitigation in India. It's a challenging question because there are trade-offs involved.
So what are some of the solutions being explored?
Sustainable agriculture is a key focus for India. This includes things like promoting organic farming, adopting drought-resistant crops, and improving water management techniques.
It's about making agriculture more resilient and less impactful on the environment. It's a win-win, but not easy to achieve. What about forests? They're crucial for absorbing carbon dioxide, right? Absolutely. Forests are our natural partners in this fight. Planting more trees through reforestation and afforestation is crucial for pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. But we also need to protect the forests we already have. And this is where India has a long history of conservation efforts.
I'm thinking of things like the Forest Conservation Act or the National Afforestation Program. Are those relevant for the UPSC?
Definitely. The UPSC could ask you to analyze the effectiveness of these policies or compare them to international efforts like REDD+, which focuses on reducing deforestation.
So knowing the names and the goals of these initiatives is a good starting point.
Exactly. But the UPSC wants to see that you can go deeper than that. Analyze their strengths and weaknesses, compare them to other approaches. That's what sets a top-scoring candidate apart. Okay, 4 sectors down, 2 to go. Let's talk. Transport India's cities are booming, and with that comes more vehicles, more traffic, more emissions. What's being done about that?
Yeah, that's a big one, especially as our cities grow. What should a UPSC aspirant focus on in this area?
Imagine this question. Analyze the challenges and opportunities of shifting to sustainable transport in India, considering its rapid urbanization. That pretty much sums it up. Transport is a major source of emissions, and the goal is to make it more sustainable.
So things like promoting electric vehicles.
Yes, through initiatives like the FAME scheme. But it's not just about individual vehicles. Improving public transport is crucial too.
So expanding metro networks, improving bus services, making it more efficient and attractive.
Exactly. And this all ties into the concept of sustainable urban planning. The UPSC could ask you about that too.
Making our cities more walkable, bikeable, and less reliant on cars.
Hmm.
Okay, last but not least, buildings. I don't always think of buildings as big polluters, but I guess they use a lot of energy.
You're right. Buildings are often overlooked, but they're a big part of the equation. The focus here is on improving energy efficiency in building design.
Things like better insulation, energy-efficient windows, and using renewable energy sources like solar panels.
You got it. It's all about making our buildings more climate-friendly from the start. And there are specific initiatives in India that a UPSC aspirant should know about.
Like what?
Well, the Indian Green Building Council, or IGBC, is a key player in promoting sustainable building practices. They have rating systems and certifications that are becoming more and more popular.
So the UPSC might ask about those.
They could. They might ask you to analyze their impact or compare them with similar programs globally.
Okay, we've now covered all 6 sectors: energy industry, agriculture, forests, transport, and buildings. It's a lot to digest, but it shows just how broad India's approach needs to be. It's about changing the whole system.
It's not just about one sector. It's about transforming the entire economy. Now remember, those localized impact studies we talked about in part 1? How do they fit into all of this? We've been discussing national level policies, but how do we make sure those translate into action on the ground? That's a brilliant question. And it gets to the core of what the UPSC is all about, analyzing how effective policies are and what their real-world impact is. Those localized impact studies help bridge the gap between national plans and local realities.
So they tell us how climate change is affecting specific areas and communities, which helps us find solutions that actually work in those contexts.
Exactly. It's about moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach and recognizing that India is diverse. The UPSC could ask you to analyze how those localized studies can inform policy decisions, improve adaptation strategies, and make sure everyone benefits from the transition to a low-carbon economy.
So it's like connecting the global climate crisis with national goals and the actual experiences of people on the ground.
Precisely. And that's the kind of big picture thinking the UPSC loves. It's not just about knowing facts. It's about understanding the connections, the complexities, the whole picture. We've covered a lot of ground in this part, but there's one more crucial piece to explore: the role of technology and innovation in tackling climate change.
That's where things get really exciting. From renewable energy advancements to carbon capture, technology has the potential to revolutionize our fight against climate change. Welcome back, everyone. It's the final stretch of our climate change deep dive, and we've saved the most exciting part for last: the role of technology and innovation. This is where we can really see the potential for big changes, and for those prepping for the UPSC, this is where you can really shine by showing, about the latest solutions.
You're absolutely right. Technology isn't just about fancy gadgets. It's about finding smarter, more efficient, and more sustainable ways to deal with climate change. And the UPSC loves to see candidates who can connect the dots between those advancements and their impact on everything: policy, society, the environment.
So let's get specific. What are some of the key areas where technology is making a real difference in climate action? And how can a UPSC aspirant use this knowledge to stand out in the exam?
Okay, imagine you're answering a UPSC question about India's climate adaptation strategies. You could talk about the usual approaches like building seawalls or developing drought-resistant crops. But what if you also mentioned using advanced climate modeling to predict future scenarios and plan our infrastructure accordingly?
It's like using technology to anticipate the challenges and get ahead of the curve. Instead of reacting, we're preparing.
Precisely. And that kind of forward thinking is what impresses examiners. So what other technological advancements are we seeing in this fight against climate change, especially those relevant to India?
Well, renewable energy is a sector that's constantly evolving. What are some of the latest developments there?
We're seeing huge leaks in solar panel efficiency, making them more affordable and accessible. Battery storage is also getting better, which helps with the problem of solar and wind power not always being available. And there are even newer sources like offshore wind and green hydrogen that could be game changers for India.
It's not just about using what we already have. It's about pushing the boundaries and exploring new possibilities. And for a UPSC aspirant, it's about being aware of these cutting-edge technologies and how they could shape India's energy future. Now, I've heard a lot about carbon capture and storage, or CCS. Is that something India is considering, and could it show up on the UPSC?
CCS is definitely a hot topic, and the UPSC could ask you to analyze its potential in India's journey to net zero emissions. Basically, it captures CO2 emissions from industries and stores them underground so they don't enter the atmosphere. It's still early days, but it's promising, especially for industries that are hard to decarbonize, like cement or steel.
So it's like a backup plan for those tough-to-tackle emissions.
Yeah.
Are there any downsides to CCS that a UPSC aspirant should know about?
Well, the UPSC might ask you to evaluate how feasible CCS is in India, taking into account things like cost of the technology itself and potential environmental risks. There are definitely challenges like the cost, the risk of leaks, and the need for strict regulations. But research is moving fast, so it's definitely worth keeping an eye on.
Okay, we've talked a lot about mitigation, reducing emissions to slow down climate change. But what about adaptation, adjusting to the changes that are already happening? How can technology help us adapt? And how might this come up in the UPSC exam?
Think about a question that asks for innovative solutions to water scarcity in a climate vulnerable region. You could mention traditional methods like water conservation, but you could also talk about using technology to manage water more effectively.
Like using sensors and data to improve irrigation, predict droughts, or even develop those drought-resistant crops we talked about earlier. It's about using technology to make our systems more flexible and adaptable.
Exactly. And we're also seeing the development of climate-resilient infrastructure using new materials and designs to withstand extreme weather. And early warning systems powered by real-time data are crucial for preparing for and responding to disasters.
Technology can help us on both sides of the problem, reducing emissions and adapting to the impacts. But it's important to remember that technology is just a tool. It's the human element, the policy decisions, the community involvement that will ultimately determine if we succeed. And I bet the UPSC will want to see that you understand this human side of things too.
Absolutely. The UPSC might ask you to analyze how policy can encourage innovation and make sure that these advancements benefit everyone. We need strong policies to support research and development, create markets for clean technologies, and address any concerns about fairness.
And education has to be a big part of this, right?
Yeah.
We need a society that's not only aware of climate change, but also knows how to develop and use solutions.
You're right. Climate change education needs to be part of school curricula at all levels, and we need to invest in training programs to prepare our workforce for the green jobs of the future. The UPSC could ask you to analyze the role of education and capacity building in achieving India's climate goals.
It's about building a society that understands the challenges, embraces the solutions, and actively participates in building a sustainable future. Which brings us to the importance of community engagement. Why is it so important to get local communities involved in climate action, and how might this show up in a UPSC question?
The UPSC might ask you to analyze how community participation can help with implementing climate change strategies. Local communities are the ones feeling the impacts firsthand, and they often have knowledge that can inform adaptation strategies. Involving them in the decision-making process, empowering them to be part of the solution, is crucial for ensuring that climate action is effective, fair, and sustainable.
It's about recognizing that climate change isn't just a global problem, it's a local problem. And it's about giving communities the power to be agents of change. Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive, and it's been an amazing journey. We've explored the science, the impacts, the policies, the technologies, and the human aspects of climate change in India. We've covered a lot of ground, and I hope our listeners are feeling more informed and prepared to tackle this topic.
And for our UPSC aspirants, I hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge, the insights, and the tools you need to confidently answer those challenging exam questions. Remember, climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It touches everything: economics, social justice, politics, technology, every part of human life.
So it's not just about memorizing facts, it's about seeing the bigger picture, understanding the connections, and analyzing the complexities. And if you want to explore this topic even further, don't forget to check out the original article in the Indian Express. It's a gold mine of information for any UPSC aspirant.
Absolutely. And remember, the UPSC exam is about more than just knowing the answers. It's about showing your critical thinking skills, your ability to analyze, and your deep understanding of the challenges facing India.
That's right. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the issues that matter. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends who are also on the UPSC journey. The more we share, the more we learn. And together, we can build a brighter, more sustainable future. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those hearts passionate. We'll see you on our next deep dive.